Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining EAC's webinar today. This is Addison Tyne. I am the marketing specialist here at EAC. We will be recording the session today, so pending any technical difficulties, everyone will receive a replay of the webinar. Please feel free to drop any questions in the queue, and we will get to them after the presentation. Following the session today, a short survey will appear, so please stick around and answer these questions after the webinar. Today, I will start off with a short introduction of EAC, and then our technical account manager and Creo expert, Todd Liebenow, will be showing us how to overcome the challenges of your multi-CAD environment with Creo's feature recognition tools. At EAC, our mission is to transform the way companies design, manufacture, connect to, and service their products. We are located all over the United States, with our headquarters currently in Minneapolis. We are more than just a value-added reseller for PTC, though. For over 20 years, we have helped companies innovate their product development processes. With experts in over 22 different areas of product development, we help organizations create better products, rethink what may seem impossible, and ultimately achieve results that make a lasting impact on the world as we know it today. Beyond helping organizations connect to the information they need, we also help companies to connect their enterprises as well as specific focal points which produce bits and pieces of their operational value. We also assist with design and engineering products, host educational webinars, and PTC certified training courses. Aside from that, we have partnered with Formlabs, which allows us to offer our customers some of the latest and most affordable 3D printing options in the industry. All in all, we want you to know that EAC is a company to get all the technology at the forefront of your business to help make your team successful. Our niche is helping you figure out where to start. Our specialty is helping you build on what you already have. With that, I'm sure you've heard enough of me ramble on for now, so I will go ahead and hand things off to Todd so we can learn more about Creo's Unite functionality and flexible modeling capabilities.
All right, thanks, Addison. So let's do a quick visual. I see what happened there. I hit the space bar and that muted me. So I'm going to go ahead and just click here in my PowerPoint slide and move forward and assume that you still have me in audio. Is that right?
Yep, I got you, Todd.
All right, cool. So appreciate that audio visual check. So we're here today to talk about several different things. Flexible modeling, Unite functionality. I'm going to sprinkle in something at the end for feature recognition tools. So really 3 different tool sets that are available for you to help you with non-native CAD data and work with those items and do different things. So let's start here at the top with PTC acronym, FMX. So that's Flexible Modeling Extension. So some of the challenges that you often have in dealing with product development is long length new product innovation or cycle times. It takes a long time sometimes to deal with this non-native data. You're throwing different CAD files back and forth between your customers and suppliers and whatnot, and probably reverting back to a lowest common denominator type of thing, like a step file or an ISO or something like that. So it works, but it really kind of slows things down because not everybody is working on the same, exact CAD model, so you can't see the features and things like that. What does that result in? Delays, over budget as far as costs and that type of thing. You run out of time towards the end of the project, and it takes away from your ability to innovate, and it just is not the most cost-effective or most efficient way to actually do product development. So what happens? You potentially lose out on market share or profitability, and you're not making as much as you probably could. So enter into the scene Creo's Flexible Modeling Extension. So on this screen, we've got several different images here, and it kind of flows from upper left to lower right. And what we're really showing here, and I'll show this to you live in the software, is working with the geometry and doing direct modeling changes to it. So you can recognize different pieces of the geometry as cuts and bosses and those types of things, and then move those things around dynamically and interactively to put them where you'd like them to be. And this could be done on both Creo native data, or it could be done on non-native data as well. So it's some nice functionality that we'll show you live here in just a little bit to do those late stage design changes or work with non-native data. So a little bit about the user interface. What does this look like inside Creo? I'll highlight this when we get into Creo here in just a minute. But in the upper left-hand corner of the ribbon, when you click on the Flexible Modeling tab, you're going to see the selector or the collector up there at the top. And it's going to be grayed out by default when you start because you haven't selected any geometry. So don't let that trip you up, right? You need to actually select some piece of geometry first before that collector actually lights up and allows you to specify how you want to recognize that piece of geometry. You also have the ability to recognize patterns and symmetry along with additional geometry types, things like rounds and chamfers, and you can manipulate those items in a really easy to use fashion. Obviously, it's directly inside Creo Parametric, so it's seamless, right? You don't necessarily have to do anything other than click on a different tab inside Creo to get to that flexible modeling functionality. Note that this will only be available for you while you're either in a part by itself or you have activated a part in an assembly. Otherwise, that flexible modeling tab won't be available. You won't see it because it doesn't make sense to do that in the context of an assembly. Fast intelligent geometry selection, again, we'll show you what that looks like here, but you basically touch off on a piece of geometry and it recognizes that, and you can specify whether you'd like that to be a cut or a collected series of surfaces that behave as a cut or a round or a chamfer. Capabilities, additionally, you can recognize patterns, right? So in this case, you can start off with a piece of imported geometry and it'll go ahead and find those other pieces of geometry, whether that's a pattern or if you've got chamfers or rounds or things like that. So you'll be directly modeling and working with the 3D geometry that's inside your solid model. So that is one thing you're definitely going to want to have these models be solid. So if you have to heal them up with an import data doctor or something else like that, get that model so it's solidifiable, you'll need to do that before you can do any work with the flexible modeling functionality. Propagation, what we're talking about there is actually recognizing that pattern and then allows you to edit the pattern. So if you wanted to change the pattern count from 3 to 6 to 12 or whatever, it's just as if you've created that pattern directly inside Creo, even though you started off with say some imported geometry or something like that. So you have the ability to recognize the pattern and then edit that and manipulate that as you need to update your design. So sort of a summary slide. We have really 2 or 3 different things to talk about. So I'm going to do the slide piece first and then get into the actual presentation and the software afterwards. So summarizing, what have we talked about so far? Creo flexible modeling. The real focus here is on allowing you to work with the model, directly moving geometry. So you're not necessarily editing and redefining features. You can work with geometry as sort of blocks and groups and kind of manipulate them as a whole unit. And you can do that with either non-native data or native Creo data as a late stage design change. So you don't have to go back and worry about connecting up a series of features and editing the definition to get where you want to go. And the whole purpose for that, reduce your product development time and cost. So you can reutilize that CAD model, maybe make a modification to that and quickly and easily make that change and then not have to spend a bunch of time editing and redefining features. Which can be done, but maybe you're working with imported geometry, so you don't have the luxury of having direct access to those features. And improving product quality, right, gives you the opportunity to work with different design alternatives, thinking about different ways you can innovate. Remember that this can be done in conjunction with other Creo functionality like design exploration. So you could have different checkpoints along the way where you use your flexible modeling functionality to move or redefine or relocate geometry and have that be different scenarios in your design exploration session. So you can look at different design alternatives by moving the geometry and changing it via flexible modeling. Okay, so that's the first piece. The second thing we'll talk about, I apologize for all the PowerPoint up front. We'll do is we'll string this all together in PowerPoint and then we'll get right into the software after that. So Unite functionality, what's this all about? Well, thinking in terms of data exchange between different CAD systems, wouldn't it be nice if there was everybody was on the same page as far as working with Creo data, and everybody in the world used Creo, and then we wouldn't have to worry about this whole issue of data translation between different CAD platforms and systems. Well, that's not reality. It's not the case. It's probably also not practical, right? So everybody has different, potentially different design tools that they want to work with, and what the Unite functionality is really all about is bringing that information together. So now you can more easily collaborate instead of having to, like we said a few minutes ago, revert to the lowest common denominator with sort of an industry standard step or IGES or some other file format. Let's see if we can find a way to actually collaborate and work together with these different types of data inside one system. So we'll just build out the rest of the slide, kind of talked about the bullet points here. Everybody has, there's not everybody, but there's lots of different design tools that can be used. And we have a difficulty in incorporating these, different file formats together. And obviously that can result in increased cost and stretched out timeframes and projects being missed because timelines can't be met because you're having to wrestle with this non-native data. So what are we showing on this particular screenshot? Well, it's a little tough to tell in the model tree, but if you kind of squint a little bit there, what we're really showing is this Creo assembly. But over here we have Creo components, and then we have SolidWorks and NX type different components and subassemblies all living together inside your Creo assembly. And so that's just kind of a snapshot of what it looks like inside Creo. But what are we really talking about here? We have the ability to import or bring in non-native Creo type data. And so you can work with those items directly as if they were native Creo components. So in this screenshot of this electric razor, again, it's a bit of an eye chart, but if you kind of look at it, you can tell that there's some non-standard icons in that model tree as far as the items that are there. So this is a Creo assembly that has, in this case, it's NX components. Some of those components are NX, and some of those components are Creo files. And so they can live together in the same assembly, and you can manipulate them just as if you would native Creo functionality. You're not necessarily going to see the features in the model tree, but you'll have the geometry that's there. And because we just talked about the flexible modeling aspect of things, you'll still be able to make modifications to those components using flexible modeling. How does it work? File open, right? So it's just as if you're going to open that component up inside Creo as if it was a native component. File open, or you can assemble and then specify the type of component that you're looking for. What I typically do is set my selection filter to look for the type of object that I want to try and open. So if I'm looking for a SolidWorks part or a SolidWorks assembly or NX type object or what have you, I set the selection filter so that it looks specifically just for those type of objects. Because by default, Creo is going to look for its own type of things first, but you can narrow the scope where what it's going to look for by setting that selection filter when you do the file open. Additionally, on the slide, we talked about no new primary business objects going to be created in Windchill, right? Because you're utilizing this other CAD data. So you're not necessarily bringing in or creating a new Creo object because you're actually just working directly with that other file that you brought in, right? So let's go ahead and talk about some of the additional capabilities. So here's a small sampling of the files that you can open up. Again, it's just sort of a screenshot of the file open dialog there, and it's just a partial list of the different types of components or objects that you can bring in. So that's the first thing. You can import or bring in these non-native files, but additionally, you can write out these different file formats. So that means that you can bring in a SolidWorks object into your Creo assembly, manipulate it, do what you want to do with it, make modifications using flexible modeling. And then you can save that off as an NX file or a CATIA file if you want. And you don't have to have a seat of NX or CATIA on your machine. So you can just write out that other different file format just simply by selecting the type of object that you want to create when you save that object. And automatic update. So there's the associativity aspect of things, right? So if there's a change is detected when you make a modification to your non-PTC data, make a change to that part, it'll automatically detect that and update your model based on those changes that were made to that part. So a summary slide for that. What's the value of Creo Unite? It allows you to work with these non-native file format objects together with your native Creo assemblies. Do what you need to with them, bring in this other data, build your assemblies around that, what have you, and make your modifications. And then if you need to save that off in a different file format for collaboration with somebody else, you can do that. So in summary, it allows you to bring in and integrate these other different file formats together into one sort of seamless environment where you can continue your product development process and integrate in the different objects into your design. So again, consolidate multi-CAD data. Again, I've probably talked ahead of my slides here, but just sort of summarizes the things that we've talked about so far. Questions on anything so far that's popped up, Edison?
Nope, I don't see anything.
All right, let's keep going then. I'm going to go ahead and get rid of the PowerPoint because we're more interested in seeing what's going on here inside Creo than we are in PowerPoint. So let's go ahead here, and I'm just going to go ahead and show you a couple of things first. The first thing I want to do is go to the options, and this is something that a lot of people don't necessarily know about, but and that's why we're gathered today to talk about it. I'm going to go to options and look at the data exchange. So a lot of times when you're working with non-native data, a lot of people will just do a file open, and they'll just open up that step or I just file, and then they'll say, oh gosh, I didn't get my datums, I didn't get my layers, I didn't get, all that stuff that comes along with your start model. And that's kind of a bummer because then you have to go back in and sometimes people write a map key to go in and insert all that stuff. Well, that's kind of a hassle. If you go to this data exchange tab though, you can actually go and kind of pre-specify what you want to happen when you open up these different types of objects. So you can set this up here and you pick the type of file format that you want to specify or work with. So in this case, if I say step, right, I've got this import profile that I've defined for that. And I've just browsed out to that. I've just saved this here in this location. So you simply point to that. But what happens is you can, if I just do a file open, right, we'll just show you kind of what that looks like. We'll say file open. I'm going to look for a step file here, for example. I'll go ahead and just pick on this step file. And so this is what pops up. And so what that profile does is it basically defines what's going on inside this little dialog box when you open it up. So what I mean by that is you can pick on this profile and the details of that profile are here. So what this allows you to do is to specify your template, which is going to be your start model for either parts or assembly. Strongly encourage you to do that because that's going to wrap your start model information into that step file. In this case, we're opening a step. So it's going to wrap your start model information into the object that you're opening up. And there's a lot of other things you can set here that control what happens to that step model when it comes in. So here we're starting to think about using the template. Here's where we can specify the accuracy. Do we want the accuracy to be read from the model as you're reading it in? Do you want the accuracy to be set from your start model? Or how do you want to specify that? And you have options here for that, either the internal or external accuracy. Other items you can specify, kind of define what happens with the geometry as it's being read in. Do you want to keep the B-spline surfaces? I'm not going to read you all the options here, but just note that you have a lot of flexibility and control over what happens in this import profile. So you can control how this is going to get read in and how it builds that geometry out. And so the point here is that you can set this template up for SolidWorks files or CATIA files or NX files or step files or whatever, and then you don't have to go back in and touch all these different things individually when you do that file open. So go ahead and do that, right? So just bring in that step file and notice what it did, right? It grabbed items. If I take a look at my layers, all of those layers are there. If I go back here to my named views, right, they're all going to be there. If I had parameters and things like that, they're also going to be there, right? So here, if we look at our parameters, so we have these different parameters that come along with that, right? So that's the first thing is that I find a lot of people they'll do either one of two things, right? They'll do a file open and just grab the step file and don't bother with the template, and then they'll have to kind of struggle with these items, or they'll say file new, create a new part, and then do an import, right? So that kind of looks like this. If I say a file new, and I just grab all my default stuff here, and then they'll say get data, and then you do an import, and then go grab the step file and do it that way. So they both kind of accomplish the same thing, but if you do that with a template directly, it kind of speeds up that process. Okay, so that's a little bit on the data exchange. So that's not really specific to flexible modeling or Unite functionality, but more general day-to-day operation of Creo and how you can set things up. So we've read in the step file, and what can we do next with it? So if I go back to the model tab, and if you go to the get data, you'll see that I've got something called feature recognition. And you're probably not going to have this by default, right? But this is some functionality that's been around since Wildfire 4, so it predates Creo. But what this is some functionality that lets you look at the geometry and see if we can interpret or understand things like extrudes or holes or fillets or chamfers or slots. And what it'll do is kind of read through that geometry and say, well, I see if I pick on this surface, it'll identify different extrudes. So I said you probably won't see that by default. How do we fix that? So again, it's a configuration option. We go to options, go to our configuration editor, and I'm just going to go here to current session. The one you're looking for is actually called FRT underscore enabled. So that's short for feature recognition tool. And so if you just do a search on FRT, you want to turn that on, right? So what that does is if you turn this option on, that will give you this little flyout menu functionality here. So if you include that in your config.pro, you'll have to restart Creo in order for that to take, right? But then when you do that, your next session will have that. So let's show you what it looks like. If we go to search extrude, all I'm going to do is pick off on this one surface, and I'll hit OK, right? And you saw, maybe you saw on the web there that it blinked, and then it did some stuff. We have some additional features now in the model tree. So what that effectively does is it says, okay, if I look at this surface, what intersecting features do I see that could be created as an extrude type feature? Well, if I just kind of scan this, I can see that I've got this little island up here. I've got this little sort of jelly bean cutout here, and I've got a little pocket here. And so that's effectively what Creo did with the feature recognition tool. It said, okay, well, I can see that that's an extrude type feature. And so what it does is it builds that for you. And if I edit the definition of that, remember we started as a step file, and now I have this little pocket shaped feature. And if I hit the right button here, we'll drag that up and scale that. So what this is showing me here is I've got a Creo type feature with a sketch. So if I wanted to go back in and edit the sketch, I can do that. Right, so I've got all my references. So this behaves as if it's an exact or a native Creo type feature. And with my dashboard, I can change that from a cut to a protrusion using the drag handles. And I can do whatever I want with that because it's effectively like a Creo feature, okay? Because it is a Creo feature. So that's the first thing. The feature recognition tools allows me to do that kind of thing where I can scan through the geometry here, and I can look for things like extrudes and holes and fillets and chamfers and identify that, and then I can turn that into a Creo feature and manipulate that as I need, even though I started off with a step model initially. So that's feature recognition tools. So that's the next thing. I've got another model here. If we go ahead and take a look at this guy. So this was a SolidWorks part. And so what happened here, I'm just going to go ahead and do a file open. And in this case, if I change here's my selection filter. So if I want to look for, say, SolidWorks type files or CATIA files, I'll just go ahead and pick the item that I want to look for. In this case, if I look for solid parts, and if I go back here to my working directory, and let's see here. Here in flexible modeling, and sorry, I've gotten off in the wrong direction here. Let's go to the Unite folder right in here. So here I've got different, so this is my selection filter. It's kind of opening up. I'm focusing just on SolidWorks type objects. So if I had other type of objects here, say NX, for example, or CATIA or what have you, right? So if I look at those items, I don't have any of those here, but that's changing my selection filter. So that's all I did was I did a file open on that. And I'm looking specifically just for SolidWorks type objects. Now I've gone ahead. I'm already gone to my flexible modeling tab. But again, since we're in part mode, we'll see that we have this flexible modeling tab right here. We click on that, and this is what I mentioned before in the PowerPoint portion of the presentation. That this little selection filter up here is sort of grayed out. There isn't anything selected at this point. Well, that's because I haven't picked anything. But if I go back here and say, hey, I'd like to pick that surface, and I'm just going to grab the other surface here, you kind of see what I've selected. There's a little gear tooth top. And again, I'm just using the control button. And if I select those items and then treat that as a cut, then I can do other things with it. So I've selected that, and then I can go ahead and do other things. So I've got different objects I can move, different ways I can manipulate the geometry. Excuse me. I can move that with a dragger. And what happens then is I get a little gimbal that allows me to drag using the arrows or the rotate with the hoops, or I can move this in plane by using the little planar webs there that are between the different axes. And I can also do a free move by grabbing the center of the gimbal, the little red ball that's right there. So if I wanted to do something like that, I simply just pull on the arrow, and it's going to update that and drag that geometry up for me. And you can see now I've actually made that just a little bit taller. Or if I wanted to rotate that over or something like that, I can kind of rotate that over, and it'll update that geometry for me that way. So it's direct manipulation of the geometry by selecting the surfaces that I want to manipulate, and then select how I want to work with that. Again, there's different options here in my selection filter, whether that's going to be a cut or a boss or different items like that. And then I can manipulate that geometry kind of from there. So that's what I've done in that first option. I've got these items just sort of grayed out here because I'm going to step through them and show you how to do them and then show you the net result. So if I wanted to recognize a pattern, for example, if we do something like that, I'm going to say, let's go pick on a piece of geometry here. So if I select on this little surface right here, and if I take that as a cut, right, So I've just selected that. Now it's walked around the joining surfaces there and grabbed them all together, and I can treat that as a cut. Then if I say, hey, let's go ahead and recognize that as a pattern. Now you can see there's a little handles where that pattern instance would be. And then I can go here to so that's my reference, right? Then I can go back to my options and say, hey, I would like to allow the editing of that pattern. That allows me to go back here and say, I would like to have 12 of those. Now it's just as if I'm editing that pattern or creating that pattern inside Creo directly. And I'm just going to go ahead and say, I want that to be 360 divided by 12. And then if I accept that, I go ahead and now I've got a modification to that pattern, right? So I've taken that non-native data and patternized that and done other things with it that I need to from there. So it's really pretty straightforward. You just go ahead and pick on the geometry that you want to manipulate, and then do different things with it. So if I wanted to move with that dragger, I can do that. If I want to move with dimensions, that allows me to specify a dimension that create a dimension that I want to measure between some reference and the geometry, and I can very precisely locate that feature where I would like it to be. I can also do things like offsets. So I can do something like this. I'll just say I want to pick on that surface, and then I can offset that, and then I get a nice little drag handle here, so I can scale that up or down, right? So I'm making that little hole smaller, right? So I can do something like that. And then on my attachments, I can say, hey, let's propagate that around to all the other instances in that pattern. So I don't have to do them individually, but I can go ahead and make that offset adjustment to different features. So again, working with the non-native data, I have a great deal of flexibility with respect to what I do with the geometry, and so I don't have to go back and recreate it, or delete features and those types of things, and then recreate them. So I'll pause for a breath here and check and see if there's any questions.
Yeah, I don't see any questions in the queue right now.
All right. Well, that's really the quick overview. Again, wanted to show a little bit on the flexible modeling, the Unite functionality. Let's show one other thing here too, as far as showing how that works in the context of an assembly. Let me just go grab something here. We'll grab a different object to show you what that looks like. Give me just a second to drill into the folder and have this pulled up directly, but we'll go grab this here. Take just a second. Yeah, I think my folder here. Oh, one more folder down. And we'll go grab this assembly. Okay, so obviously a Creo type assembly with a couple of Creo type components. We'll show us assembling this. And again, I'm gonna go grab my SolidWorks information here. So I'm gonna go look for a SolidWorks subassembly. And you can see that I've got one of those right here. We'll just do a file open. And this ATB dialog box, that's short for the Associative Topology Bus. And I'm gonna get this little dialog box that pops up once for each of the components that are in this subassembly. So I'm just gonna basically say I'm gonna ignore the Associative Topology Bus options at this case, because I'm just bringing in that data. And now I'm gonna assemble it, right? So standard sort of Creo functionality, I'm gonna use the default assembly placement. And then from here, we can see I've now got a SolidWorks subassembly that's living in the same assembly. Here's my Creo assembly. I can work with those components and do exactly what I would if it was a Creo type component. So I can just right click on that, go ahead and hide that and drill down and then do what I need to do from there. So now in this case, I've already got a modification made to that. But if we took a look at this rocking arm, I'm going to go ahead and just activate that just like I would as if it was a Creo part. And we're working in Creo 7. So I see that nice little phantom out of both my model tree and my objects in my assembly. So I'm focusing in just on this one component right here. And I've already done some feature recognition tools and some recognized geometry here for that. But if I do something like this, right? So now I'm activating, I'm working with this SolidWorks component and making direct design changes to that SolidWorks object in the scope of my Creo assembly. So what I did was I recognized the chamfer for this. So I'll show you what that looks like. If I go back here to flexible modeling, and if I just go ahead and say, I'd like to make a modification to the size of that cylinder that's there, no problem. I can do that. I can say modify analytic and pick on this guy right there. I'm going to get a nice little drag handle that I can kind of scale that up or scale that down. But notice what happens to that chamfer that's there. It sort of changes size. It's not really following the design intent of what's going on there, right? So let me cancel that and show you how you would more appropriately deal with that. I'm going to go here to in my recognition tools inside flexible modeling. I'm going to say, look for chamfers. Let's see if we can recognize that as a chamfer. So we pick off on that, and now that's going to behave as if that was a Creo chamfer that was built in that part, recognizes the dimensioning scheme for that. And then now when we go back and say, let's modify the analytic, I'm just going to click off on that. So we'll modify the analytic, pick this, and now when I change the diameter of that, it's going to maintain that design intent and keep that chamfer the same size. Now I can more appropriately scale that up. I can plug in a direct dimension for that, 1.35. And now it behaves as if it's a Creo model with Creo features, even though it's a SolidWorks type object that just happens to be in that assembly. So that was one of the last things I was going to show you relative to bringing it all together, tied together the functionality of flexible modeling and Unite functionality in your Creo assemblies. So that's what I have for a presentation. Addison, if you want to, oh, you probably want the PowerPoint back, I'm guessing, right?
One sec, Todd. I have one question here. He said,
sure.
Can you try with inventor part or assembly?
We can. I don't know. The challenge I have there is I don't have any inventor data. So it's going to work the same. Unfortunately, with the data set that I have, I don't have any objects that are inventor type files. But if somebody wants to send me something, we can take that question offline, and I can, we can do a web meeting on a one-off kind of thing to show you how that works that way. But unfortunately, I don't have any inventor data. I could save something off as inventor data, but I don't have any inventor data that I can directly access.
Okay, awesome. I don't see any more questions in the queue. I just want to thank everyone for joining us today. There are a few different things that we are currently offering you to help advance your process during this time. So for those of you who are new to this series, I do want to let you all know we are offering 50% off on these 16 extensions. And this offer does end at the end of the week on June 27th. If you'd like more information on this offer, or if you have any other questions, please feel free to reach out to me about this. Then this next slide here is the upcoming Creo webinars. We are coming down to the last couple here, but you can feel free to watch the previous weeks we have on our website under the webinar replay page, and I will provide a link to that in the follow-up email. Next week, we will be talking about top-down design techniques, so we hope you can join us for that one. And to wrap things up this morning, another reminder, there will be a short survey that will appear once we end here. If you have a couple more minutes to spare, we would really appreciate it if you could stick around and answer these questions for us. Thanks again, everyone.